What's going on, guys? Greek Freak here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the Defensive Player of the Year, and is it going to be Paul George? Now, many people have been thinking the fact that Paul George has definitely been one of the people to be obviously considered for the Defensive Player of the Year, and whenever we look to it, it is very clear that he is a really good defender and a part of one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. So in that route, that's obviously what we do look at whenever it comes to Defensive Player of the Year. And when we look at his stats, averaging, of course, the league leading 2.2 steals per game and about a half a block a game, it's not very spectacular numbers as far as an individual standpoint, but of course the main thing here when it comes down to it is the fact that nobody really has numbers that are strictly amazing this year, or are clearly defining as a player. There's no player that really averages, other than Giannis, a block and a steal as far as within more than just one. So whenever we think about that, this leaves with the Thunder having the fourth best defensive efficiency when it comes to that because of the way that they do play. So they are one of the better defensive teams whenever we really do consider this. And the one thing that I do have to mention is I believe the fact that this Defensive Player of the Year should be about as close as the MVP race is right now, as far as there being a decision that has to be very close, where I could accept either winner in this case. So first of all, we're obviously going to be talking about Paul George. And the one advantage that I have to say Paul George has over the person that I'm going to be mentioning next is the fact that he is a very great offensive player that plays on both sides of the court. And whenever we really do look at this, we know the fact that that plays a big part as far as the mindset, especially if there's a close as far as stats. We definitely have to look at the fact that it is draining to play offense and defense at such a high level. And whenever we look at this, we know the fact that Paul George being an all-star obviously is going to help him as well. So whenever we really do consider a situation like this, I think the fact that you have to look at this in this light. So obviously he wasn't an all-star last year, but he's had a huge improvement, and that's on the offense, and I believe while still maintaining the great defense that he's been putting up, as I mentioned, leading the league in steals. So whenever we look at this, we have to look at, for the Defensive Player of the Year, how good is the team defensively, who's the leading defender as far as on that team, the face of that defense, and then of course what is their all-around level thing. We don't look at it usually as the MVP. Usually we do of course want to see a team that's in the playoffs, but it's not as big a deal as far as positioning on the team. So when we look at this, I of course have to ask you guys, do you guys think that Paul George should be this year's Defensive Player of the Year? Which I think is a very close standing as far as these two teams players, and I think the fact that it could go either way here, but in this consideration, I think the fact that we have to look at this other person, which is going to be Myles Turner. Now, many people, of course, have been thinking, as far as from his rookie year, that he was going to become a pretty good player on the Pacers, and really did not live up to those standards as far as jumping up in his ability on the offensive end, but he has definitely stood up on the defensive end, leading the league in blocks this season. And whenever we look at the situation as far as and a narrative that goes into this Defensive Player of the Year, Victor Oladipo going down, and this team still maintaining that defensive identity and a good standing on the Eastern Conference standings. So as I mentioned, averaging the 2.7 blocks per game, being the league leading, and about 0.8 steals per game. So this does make a good standard for, statistically wise, a player that could win Defensive Player of the Year. And as I mentioned, with Victor Oladipo, another great defender, and with the Pacers being a slightly better team defensively, being the third most efficient defense in the NBA, we have to look at this as such a clear standing. So as I mentioned before, with this standings, the Thunder being the fourth most defensive efficiency, so we have to look at this as what this is. It's a very close battle here, and I think many people haven't been talking about this, but I think the fact that this is something to definitely be looked at. We know the fact that somebody in Myles Turner's position does not carry the offensive load as a Paul George, therefore he is able to, of course, expend more of his effort on the defensive end in the route of what Paul George would have to do. But in the other hands of this, we obviously can look at it as the fact that Myles Turner is obviously averaging slightly more as far as an overall defensive, as far as stats, and is on a slightly better team defensively with an injury that has also occurred. So this is the reason why I think that this could be a close battle when we come down to thinking of the two players here. So really in this, I think it's going to be a preference as far as what you want. Now last season I did make a video as far as how I thought the Defensive Player of the Year was mispicked. I didn't think Rudy Gobert deserved it, considering the fact he played the least amount of games that a defensive player has ever played in a season other than a lockout season. So I thought the fact that that was very strange, and he didn't even put up the same statistical numbers as a player in Anthony Davis. But in that situation, I thought that was a very strange and out of place as far as selection for the Defensive Player of the Year. But as far as this one, I think that this one is actually close. I could be happy as far as either way, as far as any player getting this. But I guess as far as who I think personally is going to win this Defensive Player of the Year, I think the fact that it's most likely going to go to Paul George due to the fact of once again what I mentioned, the offensive load that he has to carry with that as well. When we look at Myles Turner, he wasn't an all-star, so it's going to be very, very strange to see a player that's not an all-star win Defensive Player of the Year. And whenever we look at something like that, I just think the fact that that would really come into consideration for the voters themselves. Now, I guess I'm going to ask you guys the question, who do you think is going to be Defensive Player of the Year? Tell me in the comments below, and subscribe to become part of the Greek Army today. And as always, this is Sparta.